Week 8 of the fantasy football season. Here's a few wide receivers I looked at off the wire this week. The first receiver, Xavier Legette of the Carolina Panthers. Legette had the best game of his career last week in the victory at the New York Jets. And he's obviously the number 2 wide receiver behind Tatora McMillan right now in this offense. So with Andy Dalton in there, quarterback, maybe him and Legette could get on the same page and get things going. And the last few weeks since Legette returned from injury, week 5 versus the Dolphins in that game, 2 catches, 31 yards, a touchdown. Week 6 versus the Cowboys, 2 catches, 11 yards, 2 targets. And week 7 at the Jets, 9 catches, 95 yards, and a touchdown on 11 targets. Week 8, a decent matchup at Buffalo. Their defense hasn't been all that great this season, is this Buffalo Bill defense. And if they are trailing and chasing points, obviously Carolina is going to have to throw the football way more, even though they have a good backfield. Obviously, Rico Dotto and Chuba Hubbard. So this week, after Legette coming off a big ball game and out there in 94% of fantasy leagues, definitely a wide receiver to add this week. Next receiver, Kayshon Boutte of the New England Patriots. Boutte still out there in over 65% of fantasy leagues. And the last few weeks, he's starting to get things going again for this Patriot team, where Drake May is one of the best quarterbacks in the league so far this season, spreading the football out. And he's just not zeroing in on Stephon Diggs. Hunter Henry's having some good games. Boutte's having some good ball games. And right now, he's definitely a wide receiver to add this week. Week 5 at Buffalo, 3 catches, 43 yards. Week 6 at the Saints, 5 catches, 93 yards, 2 touchdowns. And week 7 at Tennessee, 2 catches, 55 yards, and a touchdown. So I know he was touchdown dependent in the last game. If he didn't score, it was a nothing ball game. But Boutte, he's got the knack for the end zone so far this season in the first 7 weeks of the year. And week 8, it's a pretty tough matchup, no doubt about it, versus the Cleveland Browns. But like I said, Boutte's going out there making plays. I'm not saying pick him up and immediately put him in your starting lineup, but definitely someone you could pick up and then worst case be a stash on your bench. Next receiver, Marvin Mims of the Denver Broncos. Goes Marvin Mims. He was a guy that had big hopes for over the last couple seasons as Denver, but he showed some flashes here and there. So far, is Marvin Mims. Right now, he's out there in tons of fantasy leagues. Is Marvin Mims in 77%. In the last few weeks, he hasn't done much until week 7 versus the Giants, where Denver had no choice but to throw the football and score 33 points in the fourth quarter. Week 5 at Philly, a carry, 9 yards, 2 catches, 10 yards. Week 6 at the Jets, a carry, -2 yards, 2 catches, 30 yards. And then week 7 versus the Giants, a carry, 13 yards, and a big game, 6 catches, 85 yards on 7 targets. So week 8, a great matchup coming up here versus the Dallas Cowboys that give up the most fantasy points to wide receivers on the season. And I think Marvin Mims, they use him as a gadget guy at times. He has speed. Just his route running has to get better, obviously, for this Denver Bronco team, for him to really have good fantasy value. But this week, in a potential high-scoring game versus a bad Cowboys secondary, definitely a receiver for fantasy owners to go out there and get. Next receiver is his teammate Troy Franklin of the Denver Broncos. So Troy Franklin, he's been up and down as well so far this season. But like I said, one of these guys are going to break out, I think, in this week 8 ball game versus the Cowboys. That can't stop anyone, and it could be either or. So the last few games for Franklin: week 5 at Philly, 3 catches, 35 yards. Week 6 at the Jets, a carry, 2 yards, 3 catches, 19 yards, a fumble loss in that ball game in London. Week 7 versus the Giants, 3 catches, 19 yards, and a touchdown. So like I said, Troy Franklin can make plays. He had 10 targets in the last game, even though we know Bo Nix, he dropped back pretty much every play of the second half and threw the football. So right now, while Franklin's out there in tons of fantasy leagues in 79%, and I think he can help fantasy owners in deeper leagues. He's an ad this week. Next receiver, Tez Johnson, Tampa Bay Buccaneers. So now Mike Evans possibly could miss the whole season. He got concussed and he broke his collarbone in a bad deep ball play where he just hit the turf and it was a 50-50 ball. And he got hurt and took him a while to get up. So Tez Johnson, the last couple weeks, he's gone out there and he's making things happen. 3 weeks in a row with double-digit fantasy points for Tez Johnson. Week 5 at Seattle, a carry, 2 rush yards, 4 catches, 59 yards. Week 6 versus the Niners, a catch, 45 yards, a touchdown. And week 7 at Detroit, he was steady. Him and Abuka, 4 catches, 58 yards, a touchdown on 9 targets. So like I said, with Mike Evans out, someone else is going to step up. I know Chris Godwin's been out. But Tez Johnson, I believe he's going to be part of this offense regardless now, even if Chris Godwin comes back and he's good to go. But I think Godwin will sit out one more week. Then they got the bye in week 9. And this week it's a good matchup at the Saints. Not a great defense, and they give up the 15th most fantasy points to wideouts on the season. Next receiver, Cheeman Dyke the Tennessee Titans. Jimmy Dike, he outplayed A.O. Maynard in the Week 7 ball game, and someone has to catch the football over there. Calvin Ridley, we don't know how much longer he's going to be out with the hamstring injury. Tyler Lockett, they released, so that opens up another spot in the receiving room for this Tennessee Titan team. Week 5 at Arizona, 2 catches, 17 yards on 5 targets. Week 6 at the Vegas Raiders, 2 catches, 8 yards. In Week 7 versus the Patriots, a breakout game for Dike, 4 catches, 70 yards, and a touchdown. So Week 8 on paper, not a horrible matchup at Indianapolis, 4th most fantasy points to wide receivers on the season. But like I said, Indianapolis, their defense still goes out there and make plays. This week here, it's a game they're going to be chasing points, Tennessee early and often, especially in Indianapolis. And I think Dike possibly in deeper leagues could be an ad for fantasy owners. That's a few wide receivers I looked at off the wire for Week 8 of the fantasy football season.